Welcome to Lean on Goodness Moments, the podcast where we journey together through faith and meaningful conversations of our Christian life. Today in the podcast, we will explore the motto for 2026. Don't be afraid, just believe. If we look at the first line in the motto, don't be afraid, let's consider what could make us afraid or fearful or insecure.
As human beings, we find ourselves tested by what we see around us. Often it's change, and often it is the reaction of whether it's friends or relatives, or whether it is the brothers and sisters in our congregation, when we see how they are reacting to the circumstances of the time in which we're living. We look around us and we see a diminishing congregation. We look at how the children and the youth are reacting to their life of faith or their teachers and so on in the congregation. And sometimes we are even affected by the leaders, as in teachers and leaders in our congregations, whether they're choir leaders or youth leaders or Sunday school teachers and so on, because we don't agree with certain dress codes or fashions or the manner in which people speak, or we have become inadvertently traditional. And the reality is that God runs his work. God is the one who leads and guides, and the people that lead and guide in his work are called by him, and they are very different from generation to generation. In fact, as succession occurs, we find that our leaders are noticeably different to their predecessors. This is not a bad thing. It just means that the Lord is still running his work, and that God can work through whomever he calls. And what it is based on is God actually deals with the heart. He deals with the faithfulness of the one whom he calls, not with the gifts, the talents, and the abilities. God doesn't need our gifts, talents, and abilities. It's good that we have them, but God actually works with our faith and our trust in him.
Yes, it's a strange thing, that emotion fear, because it can be both protective but also very disruptive or very static. Fear can cause us to run away or to flee from something noxious, and it can also cause us to freeze on the spot and not move. And I was thinking about that, Apostle, when you were speaking about some of the fears of change that we can often experience, that God runs his work, and if we truly believe that, then we put our hand to the plow and we just carry on, irrespective of who our leaders are. But sometimes that, our own minds, our own thoughts get in the way, and it might come across as aggressive or withdrawn. But when you kind of look below the surface, often the emotion that's underneath is one of fear.
Actually, I think we've seen evidence, not just in our congregations, but in workplaces where change comes about. There is the reaction to fear is sometimes flight, but on other occasions it is fight, where someone starts to dig their heels in and they become aggressive because they want to maintain a certain tradition where others want to move on. And managing all of those things, this is where our motto becomes a guiding word. Just believe, Sometimes you just have to trust the system. We all have things in life that we don't like and things that we really do like. It's how we affect everyone around us. And this is when it comes to life in general, the guideline is just believe. Don't worry about all these things, just believe. You can only do what you believe in.
I think this fear often comes as a result of our own feelings, perhaps of inferiority or not feeling as though we're good enough to do something. But it's important to remember that God has chosen us as we are now, and we can serve him just as we are. We don't need to be perfect by whatever human definition that is. But despite any weakness or any vulnerability that we might feel, the Lord's chosen us because he sees what he needs to in us.
That's very true, Carly. One of the things that we talked about in our preparation was the belief part of it. There's the application of our belief in the creed as well. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. We must believe that. And very often we find that because of our human nature, the sense of sometimes wanting the work of God to be how we see it, we lose sight of the fact that Jesus Christ is the head of the church. We sometimes expect that in the work of God itself, the work needs to be the way we see it to be. And if it's not, then something's wrong with the work. because it's not going how I see it. And sometimes, like you said, Apostle, that relates back to change. For human beings, change is a very, very difficult thing, or emotions that we deal with. If I look into the logo that we have in our district, the butterfly, if you consider the butterfly, it has gone through dramatic change in order to become the butterfly. It was the caterpillar, but it had to evolve. And what is really beautiful, I found in our previous discussion, Teresa talked about the fact that the caterpillar doesn't just change its existing body, it actually gets broken down completely. Is that right, Teresa?
Yes.
It gets broken down completely to become an entirely new being. And I find that really beautiful.
The butterfly symbolizes frailty or vulnerability or delicate, being something that's easy to destroy. And then even the little daisy. And we can make in God's creation, there's a lot of things, actually everything, if you really think about it, even though there are things that have been robust, large and strong, they become extinct because of their frailty. Everything is quite delicate to sustain any sort of future. There's a lot of elements that have to be in place. And it's very easy to destroy an insect, very easy to destroy a little flower, but a coral in the sea. And fortunately, we've got people who are conscientiously protecting and ensuring that the environments are always undisturbed, that the continuity of coral and what it supports as a life form, or even of butterfly, shall we call them, and what it supports, and the little daisy. And there's an ecosystem that makes life good for all of us, big and strong and clever and wise and whatever as we are, or as weak and silly and irresponsible as we are. We all benefit from this wonderful ecosystem that God has created. And ultimately, there is this wonderful power in it all, God. Doesn't mean we can be irresponsible. People have points of view on climate change and all of these things, but ultimately God is the creator, and thankfully he has built into some of us knowledge and a sense of responsibility, custodianship, that we take responsibility to look after these things. But it's wonderful that these things survive. In God's work, God's never always taken the strongest. When David became king, he was a boy when he was anointed. When Samuel was called, he was also a young boy, and Eli had to direct him. You know, that's the Lord who's calling you, and you just say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." What would a boy know? All he needed to know was, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." He needed to have a heart that accepted the wish of God. Jeremiah just needed to know. God had to reinforce, "When you were a child, I laid that word in your mouth." David was a fragile boy, but he had the assurance. And probably the testimony of that was when he stood before Goliath. "I come in the name of the Lord." That's all that mattered. In other words, as big as you are, as many weapons as you have, all the things that could be imposing and terrifying, I'm not afraid. I come in the name of the Lord. I just believe.
And yet King Herod, this all-powerful king, he was so afraid of a tiny baby boy that he took quite drastic measures to eradicate and mitigate his fear.
Now, that's drastic. To make sure that you're going to get that little boy, you kill all the little boys that you can find.
But sometimes fear can drive us to also do not the same thing, but have a similar reaction. There are many factors that makes us fragile and delicate, but authenticity really is the characteristic that is at the core of everything that we should be doing, even if it means that sometimes we also have to be vulnerable and show those vulnerabilities. David was not mighty and strong. He was, like you said, small and tiny in stature. He knew that. But still, with everything, he went with absolute confidence because he had faith and trust in God. No fear.
And then on the other hand, there was Paul, who believed that he could pray his troubles away. And actually, that's not so untrue. But he said, "I had this thorn in the flesh that I went to the Lord with 3 times I prayed to remove this thorn from my flesh. And the response I received from above was very simple. My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness." And when we think about that holistically, then we get an idea of it is not about our capacity to be great or to do great things, but it is our authenticity, that humility that allows God to reveal himself through us. My strength will be made perfect in your weakness.
The motto really is a little bit about mindset, isn't it? There's quite a famous saying that says, if you think you can or think you can't, you're right. In other words, if we have that belief and that trust and we are brave, as our motto is saying, we will be able to achieve these things that we would like to achieve. But conversely, if we shy away from that and we don't have courage, then we're not going to achieve them, are we?
I was thinking of that, Carly, as you were speaking, because often bravery or courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It's taking a step forward in the presence of fear. We can have fear. It's a normal and common emotion. The important thing is not to let it overpower us. And that's where that belief is so important. It's almost like the shield that they wanted to put on little David.
One doesn't necessarily cancel out the other, does it? They can coexist. Fear and bravery can coexist.
It's interesting, though, because sometimes I think the ability to surrender, which we've talked about quite often, sometimes our very ego can supersede our faith and trust in God.
And it's not easy to surrender our ego.
I think we've got to also have patience. I think that comes into it as well, that sometimes we want to do the brave thing, or we do the brave thing and we overcome our fear, or we at least set it to one side and we move forward. And we may not immediately see the results that we were hoping to see, but then we've got to have that patience and that trust in the Lord that He will provide in the time that we need it.
I think for 2026, the motto is a blessed encouragement. That irrespective of what the circumstances are, and irrespective of how delicate we think the Lord's work is, or how fragile or vulnerable the Lord's work is, just believe, just trust in God. And when we talk about and Deacon Renee referred to it earlier, our 10 articles of faith, these cannot just be phrases that we recite, I believe in God and I believe in Jesus and I believe in the Holy Spirit, or I believe in the apostle ministry and the ministers they ordain and so on. They actually have to be lived. And when we talk about testing this belief, it is, how do we live in anticipation of the Lord's return? How do we live every Sunday when we are going to partake of the sacrament, Holy Communion? We say we believe in the sacraments, but when we have to partake of that sacrament, how does it affect us? This is how we can just test ourselves, whether I have fear or whether I do actually believe. And then we will, hopefully, all being well, we will be comforted in the understanding that God is the one who has blessed us with this belief.
That's quite a powerful thing when you say that, Apostle, because when you really consider that God has blessed us with belief, then you have to ask yourself the question, how can we then still fear when we've received something from God Himself?
We just have to always acknowledge that there's a humanity that we are contending with all of the time, every single one of us.
And I think for our brothers and sisters in faith too, it's not to take away from the fears that they face. Not at all. For some of them, those fears are very real. There's fear of health. There's fear of loss of a loved one. There's fear of, financial situations, many different things. And sometimes these fears can be really debilitating and be all-consuming. And it's not to say that they do not believe, that they don't have faith.
I often actually think of the father who came to Jesus because his son threw himself into fire or into water at a self-destructive disposition. And Jesus' response to this man was, if you believe, your son can be healed. And this man's response was, is my belief sufficient? He said, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Is my belief sufficient? And that was a concern that he would not be a blessing for his son with his belief.
When we consider this motto and this message of hope for the year ahead, don't be afraid, just believe. What could really be key thoughts for us to guide us as we move forward in the year?
Well, from the point of view of our faith, change is always a concern. And as we all know, our chief apostle is going to retire, and we wonder, what's going to become? What will the new chief apostle be like? Most of us look at this positively. Some of us are very skeptical, and then there are those who are full of doubts. But in the end, I think it's quite nice when we all realize, it's always good to see that the Lord continues to lead His work. And I feel quite blessed. As a young child, I experienced the chief apostle Schmidt, and then chief apostle Streckheiser, and then chief apostle Uerwieler, and then chief apostle Fair, and so on. And now I'm really bragging about my age. not one of them was a replica or a clone of their predecessor. But my goodness me, we experience great things. And so it will continue to be. And going back to our last podcast, it was forecast that Jesus would be this king forever. For all the generations to come, he will be king. And God is ruling forever. Just believe it.
I think one thing we can all work on, you mentioned before, Apostle, that it isn't important what gifts or talents we have, but one thing we all have is the ability to work towards unity. And if we are a united front, then these fears are perhaps minimized a little bit or reduced a little bit. And together we can be brave. Together we can believe.
I was just thinking about the logo and what a lovely reminder that is for us that God provides. God provides everything for his creation. He provides the delicate flowers for the delicate butterflies. And so perhaps sometimes if we were struggling with belief, we don't really need to look far. We just need to look at creation. And there it is, like an open book, plain to see that God is in control. He provides everything for all aspects of his creation, and he will provide for us as well.
That's really beautiful. When you were speaking, Teresa, I thought a lot about, I think in one of our previous podcasts, we talked about when we don't have the words, then the Holy Spirit will give utterance. And sometimes that too can be the situation with our unbelief. That is where we can also lean on the Holy Spirit to encourage us, to uplift us, and to strengthen us. It is there for us. We need to engage it, really. I thought so much about the 10 articles of faith. When you look at the last line of the motto, just believe. Believe is the last word. Our 10 articles of faith all start with I believe. There's a beautiful word of encouragement and strength just from those 2 lines. Don't be afraid, just believe. Apostle, deacons, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast as always. I'm certain that our members would want me to wish you and the community a wonderful 2026 and a blessed year ahead.
A very happy and a very blessed new year to everyone too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.